negotiation strategies. Many years ago, the author, W. Clement Stone, made an interesting statement we sometimes call the slight edge principle. I think it's so applicable to us as managers. He said, there's very little difference between people, but the little difference makes a big difference. Nowhere is that more true for us as managers as in our use of negotiation strategies and tactics. We're going to look at a number of them in this session, but before we do, I want to mention 4 important principles that I hope you'll apply with each of these strategies and tactics. The first principle I think I can best describe with an example. I remember many years ago, I did a program for a major company. It was a company that negotiates very above board, very win-win in their nature. It's important that you know that for the story. A young lady came up to me after the session. We had talked about all the different strategies and tactics. And she said, Dr. Hennig, let me tell you about an experience I had when I first came with this company as a new manager. I went with our senior buyer, I'm in the purchasing department, on a training trip, and I was observing, and I watched him in this particular negotiation. And she said, I couldn't believe what happened. She said the company made the proposal to us, and as soon as they did, he closed up his notebook, put it in his briefcase, and was about to get up and walk out. She said, I couldn't believe that in an organization like this, we would use something that strong that early in the negotiation. But she said an amazing thing happened. They got him to sit back down, and they came forth with another proposal. And in a very short period of time, we seemed to put together a very good, what I thought was a win-win long-term agreement for both parties. But she said, you know, it still bothered me. As soon as we got out of that room, as soon as I had a chance, I asked that senior manager how often he uses something as strong as the walkout that early in a negotiation. He thought for a minute, and he said, you know, I don't think I've ever used the walkout before, but the timing was right. That's the first principle. Remember the importance of timing. Timing is extremely important in the use of these strategies and tactics. The second principle follows from it. We as managers need to learn and use many different strategies in our approach to solving the problems that we face as managers. There's a third principle that's very important. We're learning these strategies not only to use them, but what? To be able to recognize them and understand what we should do as a counter to them so that we truly understand how to handle in every situation these different strategies and tactics. The first strategy, agent of limited authority. Now, by description, agent of limited authority is the negotiator being unable to make the final decision. I love to be in that situation as a hired negotiator. I often am. But that gives me power, doesn't it? The purpose, you see, of agent of limited authority is what? It gives me 3 things. First of all, it buys me time. I don't need to make a decision. That's good. I can think about it. I've got to go back and check with somebody else. Secondly, I can get the input of other people to help me make that decision. And there's a third thing that it does. It helps me maintain the relationship with that other party because somebody else can be the bad guy. There is real power in the use of agent of limited authority. And even though you as a manager may have the ultimate authority, you may want to get that limited for certain negotiations that you become involved in. Now we talk about this strategy not only so that you can use it, but it's used against you, isn't it, many times? Let's talk about what we can do as a counter to that. The first thing that I would say to you is be sure that you determine the authority level before beginning the negotiation. And you can simply ask, on matters of this nature, who makes the final decision here? Now, what's likely to happen when you ask it up front? Their ego may get in the way, and certainly they're not thinking about using agent of limited authority later on, and they'll say, I'm the person responsible. It's much more difficult for them to switch later on. A second thing that you can do to counter agent of limited authority is try to arrange access to the ultimate authority. Now that might be by, rather than meeting at your place or a mutually agreed upon other place, perhaps negotiating in their environment where they could go immediately to that ultimate authority and get a decision. There's a third thing you can do. If you know you're dealing with an agent of limited authority, it may be good for you to become an agent of limited authority yourself. The thing you don't want to happen is to get the end of the negotiation and have agreed to the 5 points, and then they say, well, now let me go back and see if I can get these approved. You realize that then they're going to come back and you're going to have to make a concession here and you're going to have to make a concession here, and that's what you want to avoid. The next strategy, funny money. Now, by definition, funny money is presenting your position in the most favorable way to you. And it's important that we do that. The purpose of it, of course, is exactly that, to present it in the light most favorable to you. Let me ask a simple question here, and I think it'll help you understand the power of funny money. Have any of you recently gone into a store and purchased something for $30? It wasn't exactly $30, was it? What was it? It was $29.95, wasn't it? There's the power of funny money. That's presenting it in the light most favorable to you. Let me give you another example. I remember recently receiving a letter from an insurance company for some of the business insurance that we had, and they were increasing that insurance premium 30%. Well, that's a big increase, and I could object to that, except they used funny money to explain to me the reason for it. They said that the premiums on that particular policy had not been increased over the last 10 years. And in the last 10 years, the inflation rate, the consumer price index, and many other things that they quoted were much more than the 30% that they were increasing it. Well, I almost felt like welcoming that increase, even though it was a great one, because they used funny money in describing it. How about the counter to funny money? All you need to do here is recognize that it may be used and make sure you look at things in the light most favorable to you. The next strategy, standard practice. Standard practice. Now, by definition, that's the use of statements like company policy or industry standard. Or an attorney might say, this is the standard contract. You ever had an attorney say that? The implication is, hey, you don't need to read the details here. Everybody accepts this. And of course, the purpose of that strategy is to attempt to make it non-negotiable on the basis of the fact that it's an accepted standard and you shouldn't really challenge it. An effective strategy. I hope you use it. I remember early in my speaking career, I explained to a training director that with his company I was going to do a certain thing. He said, oh, Jim, you can't do that. I said, why can't I? He said, it's company policy. I backed off immediately. I mean, who's somebody like me to buck this big company in terms of their company policy? Now, if he would have explained the reason for that, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective as just using what we call standard practice. But remember, how now do we counter when somebody uses standard practice? A couple ways. First of all, I would suggest that you automatically assume that it is negotiable, that it can be changed. Secondly, you can always challenge the standard. Why does it need to be that way? How can we approach a way to change that? The next strategy, the nibble. Oh, I love the nibble. By definition, the nibble is asking for something small. And it's particularly effective near the close of the negotiation when you can get an agreement there. And of course, the purpose of it is to get something a little bit more than you would get otherwise. Let me illustrate the nibble with an aircraft purchase example. The last time I purchased an airplane, quite frankly, I paid probably a little more for the airplane than I should, but I did use the nibble at the end of that negotiation. The individual selling me the airplane had pointed out two minor problems with the airplane that he intended to get fixed. We had negotiated the price to a certain level, and I decided to try to close the deal by throwing in a nibble here. I said, I think I can agree to the price that we've talked about here. Why don't we go ahead and knock $5,000 off, and I'll get those two things fixed when I get back. What did he say? He said, sure enough. Now, you think about it. That was $5,000 in my pocket rather than his pocket, and it was there for the asking. Now, I point out this example, not to say I was a good negotiator. I already told you I probably paid a little more than I should for it. I pointed out to ask you a question. If you were the individual selling me the airplane, and you saw I liked it like I did, what would have happened had he said no to that nibble? What would I have done? Yeah, you got it. I would have bought the airplane anyway, and the money would have been in his pocket rather than mine because he recognized it as a nibble. You see, I challenge you as managers to know and recognize these different strategies. Know that the counter to a nibble, if it's a true nibble, you can often refuse that and you'll still accomplish the deal. The next strategy ties into this example. It was the very reason that I probably paid a little more for that airplane than I should. He used the next strategy, the puppy dog, on me. Now, the puppy dog gets its name from the pet store owner who has the 5-year-old boy and his parents come in late on a Friday afternoon. He's about ready to close. They're looking and considering a puppy. What does he say? Why don't you take the little puppy home for the weekend? You can decide on Monday whether you want to buy it or not. That is a sold puppy. You see, the definition of puppy dog is allowing the other side to try the product or the service or the proposal without commitment. And of course you use it in a situation when you know they're really going to like it because the purpose of it is to appeal to their emotions. That happened when I looked at this airplane. First thing he said to me was, Jim, jump in the pilot seat, let's take it for a flight. Well, we no sooner got off the ground than he said, Jim, did you ever have an airplane with color radar? I said, no, I didn't. He said, you're going to love this. And he turned on the color radar and started explaining to me what a great safety factor that was going to be when I had my whole family or my business associates in the airplane. Then he moved on. He said, did you ever have an airplane with Loran? At that point, I hadn't. He said, you're going to love this. And he turned it on. He punched in my hometown. He says, look, Green Bay is exactly, and he gave me the number of miles, and it read off immediately. And then he pressed another button, and it read out the ground speed. Ooh, do pilots like that? He pressed another button, and it told me exactly how long it would take to get to my destination. Was I liking this airplane? Yeah. Then he said, let's see, what's your home phone number? And he grabbed the flight phone and he put that in. He says, here, tell your wife how you're enjoying this. I mean, I was really liking that airplane. As we came around for a landing, he said, let's see, your part of the country, a lot of snow, a lot of bad weather up there. He said, have you ever shot a missed approach where you had to execute a missed approach because the weather was so bad when you got down? I said, I sure have. He says, you're going to love this radar altimeter. And he turned that on and explained how that sends a beam down, and you know exactly how high you are above the ground. I paid too much for the airplane. But he effectively used the puppy dog. There's only one consolation to that. How will I sell that airplane? I will use the puppy dog technique when I sell it. The next strategy, act and take the consequences. Now, by definition, that's simply taking action strengthening your position, whether it's agreed to by the other party or not. And the purpose, of course, is to force acceptance, usually of some minor item. Let me give you an example of that. Let's assume that you've been negotiating with another manager, and you get a letter outlining the things that you've discussed and agreed to, and everything is fine except point number 10. Which you would sure like changed. A minor point, but you'd like it changed. To act and take the consequences would what? It would be to cross it out and initial it, go ahead and sign the contract or whatever was sent and send it back. Now, you put yourself in the position of the other party. If it's truly a minor item, they're excited about getting the contract back and having the deal put together, and they may just decide to overlook it. Worst case scenario, they get you on the phone and it has to be negotiated, and that's what you might have done in the first case, but you decided to use in this particular situation. Act and take the consequences. The counter to act and take the consequences, of course, you can refuse to accept that, and you can renegotiate the deal. Next strategy, the walkout. We've already alluded to that. The purpose of the walkout, of course, is to force the other party to make concessions. And it's done, obviously, by the negotiator leaving the negotiation. It's a risky tactic, but it's also a powerful tactic. And in the right situation, it's something that you may want to consider using. But we also want to look at the counter to that, because many times we're going to see someone else walk out on us. The counter, you've got a couple options. First of all, you can do nothing. Let them walk out. It may be a bluff, and you'll find out by doing that. Or you may wish to make an early concession to try to get them to stay. That's another option that you have. The third option, probably the most important, that would be to proceed to your best alternative. Now, this is an important point. I can't believe how many people come and ask for negotiating advice for me. And one of the first things I'll say is, well, what would you do if you're not able to put this deal together? And they say, oh, I don't know. Never enter a negotiation without having determined what your alternatives are, and particularly your best alternative, because you may need to turn to it, and it will certainly help you decide negotiation strategies. The next strategy, good guy, bad guy. Now, by definition, this is a situation where the good guy builds the relationship and the bad guy gets the deal put together the way it needs to be put together. You've all seen that. It might be the typical situation where there's a good policeman interrogating and the tough policeman interrogating somebody. And what happens? The tough guy walks out of the room, and then the good guy gets the additional information. I mean, one of the purposes of it is to have a good guy and a bad guy in that situation. Now, maybe you're saying to yourself, well, Jim, how do you, without acting, how do you structure good guy, bad guy? I find that many times it's a natural good guy, bad guy situation because of the role that you play as a manager and anybody else that you may have involved in that negotiation. Look for that, because I'm certainly not suggesting that you play act in the negotiation process. The next strategy, higher, lower authority, sometimes called changing levels. Basically, the purpose here is changing a level for the negotiator up or down in order to continue the progress even after an impasse is reached. Butch and I may come to an impasse in the negotiation, but maybe I can go either over or under Butch, put some pressure on, and be able to accomplish that negotiation. It is an effective technique, but it's sometimes used against you. What can you do to prevent it? If you think there's a chance of that, alert those people within your organization for that very happening, and it will help prevent changing levels. Active participation. Here's an excellent strategy to use by inviting the other party into your shoes. And the purpose, of course, is to help them see the situation from your perspective, from your side. What would be a good example of this? Well, let's assume one of you made a proposal to me and it was rather preposterous. I might say to you, gee, I'm not sure how I can sell that to my top management. Could you step into my shoes and help me understand that? You simply invite them in. Now, one of two things is going to happen. Either they know something that you don't know, and perhaps they can help you see how you could explain it, or more likely, if it's truly a difficult proposal, when they get in your shoes, it'll make them more knowledgeable about how you feel and your situation, and they'd be more willing to compromise in terms of that proposal. The interesting thing is that no counter is needed to this strategy because it's a true win-win strategy. You're just asking them to step into your shoes. Feel, felt, found. A great strategy to use when you want to help another individual understand something that they are not understanding. It's a simple three-step process. I understand how you feel. That's number one. Number two, I or somebody else, and it's probably best to have somebody else as an example here, felt exactly the same way you feel. Until they what? Until they found. And then you explain how they, when they were in that very same situation, initially felt like you felt, but when they saw the big picture, they changed their mind. Now, isn't that much better than saying, hey, stupid, change your thinking in regard to this? You see, you begin by saying, I understand how you feel, and people can really identify with that. And you slowly bring them around using that particular example. Of course, the counter to that, recognize the real benefit or value to you. Again, put it in terms of your perspective. The next strategy, the flinch. Now, by description, the flinch is a dramatic physical reaction to a proposal. Again here, now I'm not suggesting that you become an actor in your negotiations. What I am suggesting is that you allow your full feelings to come into play. If you present a proposal to me and I am appalled by it, my initial reaction will affect your thinking, will it not? Rather than my just standing there and smiling, which I might do, hiding my feelings, in that situation I'm much better off expressing my feelings physically to you, and I can do that, and that will change your expectations. One of the things that you want to remember from a standpoint of the flinch is the counter to it. And the best thing that you can do here is to recognize that sometimes negotiators will use that to affect your thinking. Be aware of that. Budget constraints. Budget constraints is the use of some external limit to the negotiating range. I love to have that situation where something externally is preventing me from going beyond a given area. It may not be the budget, it might be the budget, but there is some external limit to that. And of course, the purpose of it is to limit the negotiating range. How do you handle, from a counter standpoint, somebody who has said, there's no way I can do it. I've got these external limitations. Well, there are actually a couple of ways. First of all, you need to recognize it as a strategy. Then secondly, you can challenge the external limit and maybe get that external limit changed. Or probably the most likely thing that you can do is you can change something about the proposal that will enable it to fit into the limits that they've provided. Perhaps you change the way the money is paid, if it truly is a budget situation, spread it out over a longer period of time. Maybe you reduce the amount of product or service that's provided. Reluctant negotiator. By definition, this is an indication of a real or a pretended lack of desire to negotiate. Now that can be real, it can be pretended. Of course, the purpose of it is to force the other party to a concession. This is an important one to remember. You want to negotiate when you don't really need that which you're negotiating. It puts you in the power position. And so what I'm suggesting is always consider timing in the negotiation situation. Because if you can truly be a reluctant negotiator, one who could care less whether you pulled it off at this particular point in time, it does give you power in that negotiation. The final strategy that we'll discuss today is the crunch. Now, the crunch, by definition, is someone saying something like this: you've got to do better than that. And you've all been in that situation. But here's the question to you as a manager now. You're in an important negotiation, and the other party, after you've made your proposal, simply says, you've got to do better than that. How do you react? Let me suggest here that perhaps the way I reacted is the way to react. Where does the pressure go when I do this in that situation, or when I ask a question? I don't want to say, how much better do I have to do? That implies that I can do better. But simply, I don't understand. Now the other party has got to reply and defend their particular position. So the power of using that, you will not be intimidated. The purpose of that strategy, of course, is to intimidate and to force a better offer. The best thing that you can do in that situation is exactly what I did, and simply ask some type of question, simple as they might be, like, I don't understand, and let them respond. I challenge you as managers to learn and practice all the different strategies and tactics. And please remember those principles in applying them. Use timing. Secondly, make sure you know and use all of them. Be aware of the counters, because we want to be as effective in responding to them as we do in using. And then the fourth principle, a very important one, never use a strategy or tactic if it destroys the relationship. You see, some of these strategies and tactics you could be viewed as taking unfair advantage of the other side. Never use one that will destroy that important power that you have, that power of the relationship that you've built in that negotiation.